hometown of Flint, and also Saginaw Bay City, a number of other communities. I'm the vice ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. We'll shortly be joined by the ranking member, Ms. Waters. We also have Representative Emanuel Cleaver, who is the ranking member of Housing Insurance, is that correct? Housing Insurance Subcommittee, and one of the co-sponsors of this forum. I know we have Representative Nydia Velasquez, a senior member of the Financial Services Committee, also here, and the ranking member of the Small Business Committee in the House of Representatives. And I thought I saw Representative Morgan Griffiths here in the back. Yes, yeah, close to the door. I know the votes are going to call us out before too long. That's not Maxine Waters. She'll be here shortly. Let me just make a couple of remarks, introduce the panelists, and ask Representative Cleaver to make some remarks, and then we want to get right into this discussion. Look, this is not exactly unplanned, but we never could have quite planned that the timing of this discussion would take place on the day after the President's budget was released, which does even more damage and harm to communities if it were to come to pass. I come from local government. I spent most of my career in local government. I've been in Congress now in my 5th year. Some of us have worked together, in fact, using CDBG, HOME, other essential tools to try to rebuild communities. In my own case, Flint, Michigan, a city that's lost half of its population, a city that has really struggled because of the lack of financial resources, the fact that our development patterns, very often fueled by government spending, have emptied out communities that are struggling to rebuild themselves. And with CDBG, we have had a flexible tool to allow communities to tailor their particular needs to those resources, to fight blight, to clean up empty spaces, to rebuild, to support affordable housing, to support the essential services, whatever they may be, and help a community get itself back on its feet again. And we've seen CDBG continue to decline. Siri is also here, following Bay City. My staff will have a lot of fun with that. But obviously we've seen these resources decline, and at the state level we've seen support for cities, I know in my home state of Michigan, nearly evaporate. That's what precipitated the Flint water crisis, as a matter of fact. And local resources, especially in communities that have had significant population loss, are just not enough. So this flexible tool has been sort of the last remaining aspect of federal involvement in these cities, and to think that that could be taken away really precipitates the need for this conversation to hear from these folks here. Why don't I ask Representative Cleaver if he would like to make some comments, and then I'll introduce our panel, and we'll get right into to the discussion.
Thank you. I'm vice ranking member of the committee, so he has options on being in all the subcommittees, and I appreciate it because he came from Flint, and which means he has knowledge about cities. Look, I'm a two-term mayor of our state's largest city, and understand CDBG as well as anybody. When I left the office of mayor, I worked for Secretary Cuomo, who was Secretary HUD for 2 years after that, and I have a very real appreciation for both CDBG and the HOME program, which started in my 2nd year as mayor. And the first thing you need to know about the budget is that it is a fantasy. It's hocus pocus, and it's projections. For example, through the president's own mouth, he said this would be the largest tax cut in history. So when you look at the budget, understand that there's no pay for it. In other words, you take revenue out of the budget and there's nothing to replace it. So it's not real, and they're projecting 3%. Well, the president said he was going to do 4% growth. I don't get on in that 4% growth rate. I'll leave that alone. What I want to talk to you about is the complete zeroing out of CDBG and HOME, and this is devastating to the cities. But what I hope people will talk about is it is even more devastating to rural areas. Yes, it's true. Kansas City is the largest city, St. Louis after us, are entitlement cities. So we're going to get an annual allocation. But a big allocation goes to Jefferson City, the capital, so that small towns like Orick, anybody here heard of Orick, Missouri? I didn't think so. And, Orick is in my district. It's probably an hour from my front door. They had a devastating hurricane that wiped almost the whole city out. Well, if you don't have $8 million in damage, you can't qualify for FEMA. And in a little town where 800 people live, it's going to be hard to get $8 million in damage, even if you tore up 100 houses. So their only chance of getting any federal help was $375,000 from CDBG, from the state, because the small towns competitively will apply to those funds. And just so you'll understand, as we're moving into hurricane season in a couple of months, when Katrina hit and devastated Mississippi and Louisiana, our committee went down. Congresswoman Waters and I, along with Al Green, went down and toured the area. What most people don't realize is that in the end, it was CDBG that rescued Mississippi and Louisiana. Community Development Block Grant. Now I have some problem with what happened because they didn't hold hearings, which is a requirement for CDBG, a public hearing. And so they went out and fixed docks for yachts in Biloxi with CDBG money. I'm not saying I'm still bothered by it. It's a long time ago and it's out of my head.
You've forgotten.
Didn't hold one hearing, not one hearing. I'm gonna move past that because that's gonna be the last thing I say before I die. Is what they did in Mississippi after Katrina. It was horrible. The docks for yachts that had been destroyed. Now, as I was saying, CDBG is critically important to everyone, and we were having difficulty surviving after all these cuts for the last 10 years. Cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. And Kansas City, for example, I can remember when I was mayor, we were getting about $24 million. It was down to 8, and the population is going up. CDBG is going down. So we've got to continue to fight this battle. It's a tough battle, but everybody needs to be in this battle, not just urbanites. And so anybody represents rural areas, they need to know that in a crunch, the only money they're going to be able to get is CDBG, and our ranking members here, and I will now stop for our ranking member has arrived.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am so delighted to see all of you here in attendance at what we consider one of the very important roundtables that we have put together to deal with what you all know now about the proposed cuts in this budget. And we are focused today on CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant. We're all big supporters of CDBG, and we feel that it is extremely important to your cities and to your towns, and that even though we have pushed back against increasing cuts over the years to CDBG. Now the proposal is to zero it out altogether. And we think that this is going to be very harmful to continuing some of the programs and some of the assistance that you had to various operations in your cities. And so we would like to put up a big fight. We would like to really push back on this. Oh, yeah, please come with us. Vinny Velasquez, who serves on the Financial Services Committee and a big supporter of CDBG, she actually did a good job. And so I understand that Mr. Cleaver and Mr. Kildee has already started, and perhaps it is time for us to get into introduction of the panelists. Did you get started with that?
Not yet.
So we have community leaders from both urban and rural areas here with us today, who know very well how important HOME and CDBG are. We hope you will help us to even understand better and tell us how these programs have benefited your communities. We have Mayor Freeman Wilson from the city of Gary, Indiana. Where's the mayor? Oh, hi. Well, you know, I don't want to divert from this, but Dick Hatcher is an old friend of mine. I go back a long way. And,
I have a message for you.
Do you really? Please tell him I said hello. Thank you. I'm very pleased that you're here. Mayor Helms from the town of Marion, Virginia. All right, there you are. Mayor, what is this, Pawlowski from the city of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Commissioner Price from Orange County, North Carolina. We have Robin Hughes, the president and CEO of Abood Communities, which is a nonprofit affordable housing developer. Oh, I should know, you're in Los Angeles. We have Bonnie Moore, the director of community development of the city of Shreveport, Louisiana. Also the president of the National Community Development Association. Bill Shelton, the director of Virginia's Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Council of State Community Development Agencies. And last but not least, we have Schroeder Stribling, the executive director of In Street Village, a homeless services provider here in Washington, D.C. Ms. Stribling was gracious enough to host the Financial Services Committee for a tour of In Street Village a couple of years ago. We're glad to see you. That is a fantastic program. And we were very pleased to be invited to do that tour. So, Mr. Kildee, they tell me that I need to turn to you.
I've already made my opening remark.
Well, then I'm going to turn away from you. Mr. Cleaver, they tell me you are next.
He made some remarks, but he has not yet mentioned the issue of the yacht.
What?
Well, let's see.
Oh.
After Katrina.
Oh.
There.
Well, with all of our panelists here today, we really would like for you to share with us how this cut is going to hurt your communities. And please give us a better idea of how you use the CDBG money, because some of the thinking that we've been engaged in really does have to do how do we absolutely connect with the people that we serve, who oftentimes don't really understand where the money is coming from and that it's at risk now. I particularly want to hear from some of our rural communities, because we find that in many of our rural areas, the understanding of where the money comes from is less than we would like it to be. And so with that, we're going to get started. Mr. Cleaver, I would like you to start with your questions that you make. We're considered to moderate the panel and to raise questions and to have you engage with us to answer these questions. And so I think I'm going to start with you, Mr. Cleaver. Yes.
One of the issues, that, as I said before the ranking member came, one of the things I think we've got to talk about, I don't care if you're from New York City, and that is what's happening to rural America, and this is, CDBG is one of them. So, I don't know if any of you are, represent rural areas and have used CDBG previously. It would be interesting, and I think important for us to know which projects, what would happen as you use those, because as we engage in the debate, it would be helpful for us to give some very specific ideas like I gave with this little town of Oregon.
Is there anyone you'd like to start with in particular?
I'll be happy to start. I'm the director of the Virginia Department of Housing and Development. We administer what I call the small cities portion of the community development block grant. We do work with all the rural communities all over Virginia, and there are 300 and some eligible applicants. So we don't touch every one of them every year. So it's more of a strategic investment around critical rural needs, and it varies by region. But I thought just to give some illustration. So. When I first started working intently in Southwest Virginia, one of the key community development issues in the coalfield region of Virginia was the lack of safe drinking water. And so CDBG is a great infrastructure tool. And in our Southwest region, it's the area of coal mining in Southwest Virginia. We had the double effect of compromised drinking water due to mining activity and then recurrent droughts. And so it was very common for people to have to haul water. They were driving miles to fill up milk jugs and haul water. It's a health issue, it's a housing issue, it's an economic development issue. And so communities were working on this issue, but they were working fragmented. And so with the ability to leverage the investments of community development funding and working with strategy of our communities in the coal fields, we were very intent on a regional strategy and funding localities, teaming with localities to solve the problem. And so in the coalfield region of Virginia, we went from 15 years ago, only 20% of the families on public safe drinking water. And now in 2017, we've hit 90% of the families in the coalfield region on public safe drinking water. So this is a huge outcome, but it's an infrastructure outcome that I think is often overlooked. In addition to all the other needs that are out there, sometimes infrastructure is one of those very key issues.
Well, I'd like, of course, Mr. Kildee and Mr. Cleaver to weigh in before we move on to the other panelists. I think it's so important for us to understand what is happening in coal mining areas, because the discussion that we heard during the campaigns, et cetera, was all about whether or not jobs were going to come back. And promises that were made that all the jobs were going to come back. But many of us have often thought about the various ways that government can be and have been supportive of families in the coal mining areas. We understand the history of black lung disease and what the ACA has done to help give health coverage to people in a substantial way. I'm hearing now from you the first time about water, and that's so extremely important. But I've never heard any real discussion before about safe drinking water in coal mining areas, and I think we have to elevate these discussions and work with the families who are the beneficiaries of this kind of support so that they understand, where the resources are coming from, why they're so important, and help us engage in pushing back on these proposed cuts. Mr. Kildee, you know a lot about water that has not been safe, and you still have families that are using bottled water for many, many months now in Flint. And so this must ring very, very true.
It does.
For you.
Yeah, folks know the story of Flint. I'm glad you raised this issue of drinking water, because it was one of the things that I was hoping we'd hear more about. In Flint, you know the story. This was a city that was forced to deal with a level of fiscal austerity unlike anything that I've ever seen. And as a result, the decisions that led to the problem with drinking water were based on financial choices made by a state receiver. And so this is one of those areas where the use of CDBG at scale and at the right moment could prevent a community from going through the incredibly expensive recovery process that the city of Flint is going through. A little bit more CDBG, for example. Had we maintained CDBG funding at its levels that it had been at in Flint, and had that resource been used to deal with the deficiencies in the water system, a few $1 million would have potentially prevented what is now something approaching $500 million in recovery costs. So I mean, this is not simply a matter of not having the money. It's a matter of spending the money in the right way. But I'd like to pose a question to the panel and ask maybe sort of two specific points. I've been around long enough and was in local government long enough that I remember the migration to this sort of block grant approach. And I remember the conversation that this was going to be a two-sided coin, that the flexibility that comes with allowing communities to tailor the use of the money to their own particular needs based on local priorities was also going to create an environment where there was not a unified constituency around the use of the money, because the dollars are used in different ways in different places. And it's not a common constituency dealing with drinking water in one place, and this would relate to even how home dollars are used. But drinking water in one place, affordable housing elsewhere, perhaps senior needs, Meals on Wheels, etc. So I'm curious about two things. One is what kind of impact you're actually seeing, because some of our opponents will argue that there's no measurable outcomes. Now, I know from administering CDBG programs, I can tell you what the measurable outcomes are, but you can't go to a single database that you can relate and say, well, this is how it worked here and it worked differently over here, or the outcomes weren't as great, because they're all being used for different purposes. So it'd be very important for us to hear what tangible outcomes are. And then the second question, which I think really gets to another part of the argument that we're going to face, is the argument that that the use of these dollars is not a federal priority, that these sorts of activities ought to be supported by state and local government. So particularly for the mayors and other elected officials here that have to make decisions about local budgets, I'd be really curious to see what pot you intend to reach into in order to offset the loss of these resources. Because the way I see it, municipal governments across the country are all operating on really thin margins and having a very difficult time staying out of Chapter 9. Without this support, how you're going to find the additional resources to offset this loss, I think the answer is obvious, but I think it would be important to hear that. So, particularly from the mayor's part.
I'll certainly take that. 6 years ago, when I took office in the city of Gary, our state had instituted property tax caps that resulted in a reduction in our budget from $48 million in terms of the property taxes on December 31st to $22 million on January 1st. That was my first day in office. Welcome to office for the job that you ran 3 times to get. And so.
You're saving money already.
And just as in Flint, we had a tremendous problem with vacant and abandoned buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the first things we needed to do was to quantify the number of buildings and then to come up with a plan of action. At the center of that plan, both the elimination of blight with demolition and deconstruction, and with the building of permanent supportive housing, affordable housing at a variety of levels, was CDBG. CDBG to demolish a building that had stood and cast a shadow over City Hall for 20 years, the old Sheridan. You probably
Yes,
remember
I do.
when you came here.
That's right.
CDBG dollars to get the university, who was holding $40 million in abeyance because they said, we're not going to invest in our building until we see the city of Gary do something appreciable. So we used our limited CDBG funds to revitalize an area around the university, do demolition, start our Dollar House program, do other things to show, yes, we are committed, and as a result, they not only decided to release the money, we're gonna cut the ribbon in September. So, I mean, that's a $45 million investment from a private or at least a state partner who had the money. And then the CDBG dollars to really deal with code enforcement, because as a result of the property tax caps, we saw our code enforcement effort go away. To deal with recreational programs for young people. And so, and then to build housing in the to replace that housing that we were demolishing, because, you know, it's one thing to tear it down, but you wanna build it up, and people need affordable housing in the community. So that's important. The other thing is the quantification. When you talk about quantifying the work that's being done, we decided to use data because we wanted to be able to say that by tearing down 50 houses in this community, you raise the property value by $50,000, by $100,000. You increase taxes by $1 million. And so we're doing that through data analytics, and other cities are doing that because we understand the need for quantification.
Well, I just want to say, you know, the CDBG is probably the oldest federal program that's out there. It's almost 43 years old. It's probably one of the most regulated programs. It's flexible, but it is regulated, as you know. And it has a lot of outcomes that have been put forth in the last several years. I know the U.S. Conference of Mayors has done a very good job of putting together a database that any congressperson can really tap into to see programs that are effective across the country. So, you know, for us, it's been utilized in Allentown on a number of different levels. But before I get into that, I just want to say, you know, this program went from almost $12 billion in the 1980s to now just under $3 billion. And just in the last 5 years, it's almost been cut by almost 50%. So we've seen a dramatic decrease in the amount of resources, and it's really, quite honestly, except for the COPS programs, one of the few programs that mid-sized cities can get through the federal government. I mean, we don't really get that many resources anymore because the cuts over the course of the last 7 years, it's been devastating to cities across the country. For us, we use it for parks. We use it for in our poorest areas. We use it for housing rehabilitation. We use it for home ownership. We use it for job training programs. We use it for our industrial incubator that we have to promote new industry within the city. We use it for, there's a cap of 15% for human services, so we actually give out grants to human services across the city, from the Boys and Girls Club to very innovative programs with a program called Community Bike Works that, you know, to keep our kids occupied during the summer months and off the streets. So, I mean, it's a flexible program, but, you know, it does have a lot of specifics. And quite honestly, this budget, if Congress decides, I think, to honor the administration's proposal, it's going to have an impact on cities and towns, really, quite honestly, across the U.S. Almost every city, every state, territory, and congressional district receives some sort of CDBG funds. There's 7,200 communities now across the state, and I actually pulled together some numbers as I was coming here on the train, just because you asked about what the impact is. And just over the last 9 years, from 2005 to 16, you know, it's helped 1.3 million low-mod income persons through single-family home ownership. 387,000 jobs have been created through CDBG funds just in the last 9 years, from 2005 to 2016. 42 million low-mod income persons through public improvements, including senior centers, child care centers, centers for people with disabilities. 133 million low-income moderate persons have been helped through public services, employment training, meals, services for the elderly. We help seniors live independently through CDBG funds used to rehabilitate homes, low and moderate income centers, Meals on Wheels. In fact, we've used our CDBG to help make matches for low-income housing tax credits, to be able to fill in the gap, and bridge financing. We strengthen families and communities through home ownership, through both CDBG and HOME funds. Created safer communities through, creating, for us, we've used CDBG for cameras in some of our low-income neighborhoods. We've used it for additional police officers, bike patrols in certain areas for overtime, you're able to use it. So it's a program that I think is incredibly effective. In fact, according to a recent study that the U.S. Conference of Mayors put together, for every dollar of CDBG, we leverage an additional $3.65 of non-CDBG funding. So I think it's one of the best programs out there, and Congress really needs to think seriously about these programs, to just eliminate these programs, to basically put more money into the military. $54 billion more. I didn't know we were. We're not at war, but why we're eliminating these programs that are having such a dramatic impact in our cities and our rural areas across the country is just mind-boggling.
I'd like to hear more about the way that CDBG is being used. Let me raise a question that the staff perhaps can help us with. There used to be something called Section 108 loan guarantee money. And that money was used for economic development, and it was basically collateralized by CDBG. So what you just described about what you were doing in the industrial area, if you wanted to do that, you wouldn't have CDBG to support the Section 108 money.
Yep.
And you know about this also.
It's a loan against future CDBG dollars,
Okay.
so you can borrow up to 15 times your
So the impact is
So we
even
actually did
greater.
that. We took an old industrial building in Brownfields that was
Yes.
down by a river. We
Yes.
used a 108 loan.
Yes.
We were able to demolish it, clean it up, and actually get a site ready for new development that occurred down there. And that was through the 108 program.
We just closed on a Section 108
Oh,
loan
did you?
for a fire station. So it's in the design phase, it's scheduled to be built next year, and if that CDBG money isn't there, there's no guarantee.
There's
for
no
that.
guarantee,
Yep.
that's right. Well, I know how important this is, and we worked with Section 108 to have it so that it wasn't scored,
Yes.
so that it could be used in the way that you're using it.
But that's a good question. What will happen to those loans that are out there that are now dependent on CDBG if the money isn't allocated for CDBG? I mean, what will,
Well,
the administration do with all these? Just forgive the outstanding loans that exist and all these?
well, that's what they're gonna have to do, because as you probably know, the second backstop is the city budget.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It's the city budget. And I don't know, as a former mayor, there is no reserve money for that. If you come to downtown Kansas City, there's a hotel, the Marriott Hotel, built in part with 108
Section
loan
108.
funds. And what we did is, because it's downtown, and, we also were concerned about the urban area, we created something called the Community Development Corporation that took profits from the hotel, shared in the profits, in order to do economic development projects in the black and brown areas of the city. So it's unlimited what we can do with those dollars, and I think that's what's troubling people. They believe in freedom of no limits, unless you're talking about trying to help people.
Well, and just one, if we take the money away, okay, you could say that you're cutting taxes. All it's gonna do is push us at the local level to have to raise taxes. And that's the only alternative backstop that we have to fill in the gap.
I'd like to
So, I
continue
mean,
to hear a little
to
bit
say you're
more
cutting
about-
taxes, you're gonna
yes.
raise taxes somewhere along the line.
Well,
If we have to.
we realized that there's no logic in what they are doing in this administration with these cuts. And so when I talk about pushing back and fighting, I'm really talking about how do we engage the beneficiaries of CDBG, Section 108, et cetera. How do we get them involved so that they can join in this pushback and this fight that we're doing? I'd like to hear some more about how CDBG is used. Let's go. Speak.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, I'm at the end here. So, yeah, I had to, well, first of all, thank you for putting up this fight because in Orange County, in North Carolina, where I'm from, to lose these dollars, it's really frightening people because we have had some tangible results. I was actually talking yesterday and today to some of the people that are the providers, you know, that the money is funneled through them. And for example, with the Community Home Trust, where they provide money so that people can become first-time home buyers, thus stabilizing communities. And with the money that they get from CDBG, they're able to leverage, it's a 1-to-6 leverage ratio. The money that they can put in means that the homes are put, are put on the market and people buy them and they're in there. So it has a rippling effect. And another program, Empowerment Incorporated, they use the CDBG funds for a summer youth program. So they're able to, and they take approximately anywhere from 10 to 30 young people every summer. They average maybe, right now it's about 11 youth, and they provide them with $3,000 for the summer so they can, and they're employed in local businesses, and sometimes they're year after year, and then they become permanently employed. So there are tangible results. And I think if once people realize that their livelihoods and their homes and their decent housing is on the chopping block, I think we can get them involved.
How do we help them to realize?
I'm Schroeder Stribling from N Street Village here in Washington, D.C., and we provide housing and support services for homeless and low-income women and families here. And we were very delighted to have you, Representative Waters, come and visit one of our programs. And in fact, that's the program that I'd like to use to illustrate how we used CDBG funding. One of our projects has been the renovation of 95 units of affordable and permanent supportive housing. And we received last year $2.5 million in a loan from our DC Department of Housing and Community Development that initiated the project, and then just as others are talking about, helped us to leverage. With that, we were able to inspire our other stakeholders. We had a successful capital campaign to raise $9.5 million from private donors, and we were also able to attract private investment in the form of low-income housing tax credits and also tax-exempt bonds. So at about 15% of the total cost of the project, this loan, which then becomes a recyclable investment in our community, enabled us to successfully get the project off the ground. About half of the renovation, which was both the preservation and the enlargement of our affordable and supportive housing programs, we recognize that we're very careful about measuring our outcomes, and we know that this is not only outcomes in terms of the social dividends, the health and well-being of communities and the individuals who live there. We know that people, the guidance that we get from HUD and elsewhere about understanding our success in supportive housing tells us that we should look at people's stability, both in terms of the length of time that they remain in stable housing, and also in terms of if they have successful and positive exits. And we're very pleased to say that over 90% of the people in our supportive housing programs are still there after 2 years, and over 90% are able to stabilize their mental health and their addiction recovery while they're with us. So we know that these programs contribute to the health and well-being of our community in that way, and we also know that good science has told us in the last decade just about how much there is to gain from the cost avoidance for communities. So when we're able to help people get into permanent housing, we avoid a lot of the costs that are associated with long-term and chronic homelessness from the dependence on other public social services.
I'd like to pause here for a minute. We have about 2 more minutes to vote. We are going to run and take the vote I will be back, and perhaps Mr. Kildee and Mr. Cleaver will be back. And while we are gone, we would like our panelists, if you would be so kind as to remain, to continue the discussion, and we are going to ask the audience to participate and raise questions of the panel about, CDBG, how it is used, and any suggestions that you may have, and we'll get back as quickly as we possibly can. Are they in the room? Okay, and if they try to put us out, we're gonna stay in.
We've done that before.
So, here's what we're gonna do. I know that, normally we would have one person, calling on those who may wanna come to the microphone and have a question. So, Ms. Hughes, you're designated. Thank you.
I will represent you well. So yes, let's begin the discussion, and please come up if you have any questions that the panelists can address.
Yes. Can you hear me? Sorry. Hello. Sorry about that. I think most of you had started talking about this, but I'd like to hear from some of the folks that haven't spoken yet, particularly the practitioners at the local level, about the argument that CDBG and HOME are not effective. If you could counter that argument. Bonnie, do you want to go ahead?
Good afternoon, I'm Bonnie Moore. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Can you hear me now? Director of Community Development for the City of Shreveport, and also President of the National Community Development Association. Community development and HOME are paramount to meeting the critical needs of our community. And if we did not have these programs, then we would suffer extremely as a result of not having them. I want to just talk about a couple of things. Homelessness in Shreveport, although bipartisan, a bipartisan issue, has been a tremendous problem for us. After Hurricane Katrina, we had an influx of homeless individuals and families, which caused an outrage and concern, particularly for downtown businesses. We soon recognized that we had the same goal in mind. And that goal was to get homeless people off the street. We came together, we mobilized, we leveraged private, public, and philanthropic dollars, but we could not have done that without CDBG. We took the forefront, we acquired the property, we did the advocacy, we worked really, really hard, and we encouraged the support of this. As a result of it, we built a shelter called Hope Connections. It's a triage shelter. It has 4 major parts: coordinated access, outreach, a soup kitchen, low restriction shelter, and also case management. There are 12 businesses and nonprofits located in one location. But I think what's amazing about this, when we talk about outcomes and we talk about the effectiveness of CDBG, the accomplishments were amazing. We decreased unsheltered homelessness by 19%. We decreased unsheltered veterans by 100%. We decreased chronic homelessness by 79%. And these are real numbers. And it could not have happened without CDBG.
So my organization, Abode Communities, we're a regional nonprofit affordable housing developer in Los Angeles. And we have been a recipient of both HOME and CDBG funds since the mid-1980s. And with those funds, we have received about $23 million in CDBG fund and $53 million in HOME funds over the past 15 years. And with those resources, we've been able to develop over 1,800 affordable homes serving extremely low and very low income families with children, seniors, and individuals with special needs. Those dollars, and we've talked about leveraging, they've been really critical in leveraging. For us, it's been 5-to-1. We've been able to leverage over $443 million and other public and private resources. And those private resources come from banks. So banks are an active partner in our low-income housing tax credit project, but they've also helped us to leverage other state dollars in the state of California, where leveraging is really critically important. I think what they really do for us is to make sure that our developments are economically feasible and that we are able to serve the neediest populations. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition shows that a average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is about $1,900. In order for a family living on minimum wage, that minimum wage earner would have to work 143 hours a week in order to afford that, so it's not really affordable. With programs like CDBG, we're able to take that market rent of about $1,900 and get it down to what people can afford, anywhere from $600 to $1,000, which is much more affordable for the people that we're trying to serve. So it's a really critical piece of addressing the affordable housing crisis. You know, if the program were eliminated in our region, I think we would see anywhere from a $2 to $3 million decrease in funding on any given project. And overall, I would say that we would probably experience about a 20% reduction in the production and preservation of affordable housing in our region. You know, I just want to give, again, an example of a really critical project that we are just starting construction on in South Los Angeles. This development is located across the street from the University of Southern California, major transit area, a neighborhood that has experienced significant gentrification as a result of just the pressure of student housing in the neighborhood. We were able to acquire one and only sort of significant sites in the neighborhood. There are an existing 48 units there. Through a major community engagement process, we are now able to develop 148 affordable units in that neighborhood, ensuring that it would be affordable for the people who currently live there. But equally important, as part of our outreach, people really talked about the need for community serving retail and for healthcare. And as a result, through leveraging of our resources, including CDBG, we were able to bring a federally qualified healthcare clinic to the neighborhood, as well as community serving retail. And without that plug of CDBG funds for that particular development, it just would not have occurred. So that's an example. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I'm so short. Hi, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you all for your time. My name is Whitney, and I'm here with Children's Rights. And your hard work does not go unnoticed. With CDBG, it's affected my foster brothers and sisters. It has, and especially with homeless veterans, because I'm a military spouse, and that hits home real hard. With the CDBG program, it has allowed foster youths and veterans to be able to have programs, you know, to be able to transition properly. But there's still an ongoing problem that I think is detrimental to America's future, and that's our children. Because I was in foster care, and I could have ended up homeless, and I depended a long time on the CDBG programs that was given to us. Now, I guess where I'm going with this is, once a lot of foster youths depend on this program, because we make up a large population of homelessness, because the system has failed us, though it's meant for good. So just in case that there is a cut, and what if it does happen, and what if it doesn't, how do we, through this, protect children, particularly in foster care?
One of the things that we understand as mayors is that when others fail, we don't have a choice but to step up. And so we have to come up with a way. And even as we've seen cuts previously in both federal and state government, We have developed public-private partnerships. We've also courted the philanthropic community and have come up with ways to address issues relative to foster children, issues relative to homelessness, and other issues that you raise and that we know exist in our communities. Social impact bonds is something that is increasingly being used in the United States. It's been used in other countries for some time now. And it makes you more innovative. But my position is that while we always have to look at other options and opportunities, we don't want to let the federal government off the hook. We pay tax dollars. This is our money. And at some point, we have to say how it's used. And we always want to make sure that it is used for the care of those who are least able to care for themselves.
I think some of the things town of Marion, which is out of southwest Virginia, we've used CDBG money a lot for economic development. One situation, the court system in Smith County was mandated to remodel the courthouse, and it meant tearing down the 1908 schoolhouse there in our community. And the citizens came forth and asked us to try to save that schoolhouse. Along with the renovation of the courthouse, the court system demanded, I don't know why it wasn't 95 or 100, but it was 98 parking places. So the county's idea was to tear down the schoolhouse, and the citizens came forth and asked us to try to save it, provide it for other purposes, which was CDBG money. We were able to purchase that building, and we renovated the school facility as the Wayne Henderson School of Appalachian Art and Music. And I think in that, we're providing lots of activities for all of our citizens, from senior citizens. We have children who are in during the day. And it's kind of been the focal point of our downtown revitalization. I use the little story that we're a small town, 7,000 people. Our main street is an incline, and Friday afternoon when the banks closed, you could roll a bowling ball down Main Street and not hit a thing until Monday morning when the banks reopened. And so we've revitalized our downtown. This is something the citizens have asked us to do. We've seen a lot of growth in our downtown businesses, from a 17% vacancy rate to under 4% at this time. And our strip center rates were under 3% vacancy rates. We've used the CDBG money to facilitate and to encourage private citizens to take part in revitalization. And I like to look at the fact that Marion is an overnight success, but it's been 20 years in the making. We've not only, and I've in a rural section, not only do we have the CDBG funds, not only in Marion, Virginia, but across the Mount Rogers Planning District, which covers 6 or 7 counties and 2 cities in southwest Virginia, provide affording housing, water projects, sewer projects, all of those type things. And I think it's very important that we encourage our Congress and Senate that they support this move, and also to some way try to encourage the President and his staff. But we've all in all, Marion has received just over $4 million in community development block grant funds since 1984. A lot of this has been used in rehabilitating housing. And that has been a lot to me. Just after I was elected mayor, had this lady came to me and asked if we would try to do something in her community, in her area of town, to upgrade the housing, not so much her house, but houses in the neighborhood. And we were able to get this funding, made a lot of progress, not as much as we would like to have made, but we made a lot of progress. We built playgrounds in the area for children, made it a much safer place for children and citizens. And I've stayed in touch with this lady over the years. She wanted to stay in her home. That was her goal. I want to stay in my home. I raised my family here. Her husband passed away. And just before Christmas, she broke a hip, spent some time in the nursing home. And visited her some then, and she said, you know, I want to live to be 95. She reached her 95th birthday on April 18th. She passed away on April 19th. So it means a lot to me to know that we gave her some good times in her neighborhood. They've been hardworking people all their lives. You know, we've tried to use the CDBG money as a way to encourage other people to participate, and we've been very successful in this. As part of the Wayne Henderson Music and Art School, we have a lot of homeschool children who participate in this during the day for art, music activities. Wayne Henderson, if you were out in our area, everybody knows Wayne Henderson. He's a luthier. He's made guitars for Eric Clapton and several other well-known people. Now he's teaching that art to citizens in this Wayne Henderson school. He'll only have 6 students in a class at a time. The cost is $3,800. They come away with a guitar that Wayne and the student helped to build. He's had 2 classes now. We have a waiting list. And that's we're putting a lot of money into tourism. We have the Lincoln Theater, which is one of 3 Mayan theaters in the United States. And we've used a lot of the money to help support these activities. And to also encourage reinvestments. Also at Wayne Henderson School, we have 2 community colleges. We've gone since 1967 when our junior college closed in our town. We're rural Virginia. Community college system came in. Abingdon had a school. Withfield had a school. Marion's halfway between both. We had a junior college, so they kind of eliminated us. In 1967, that junior college closed. Our students could either drive either way 30, 40 miles. Now we have a partnership with the Withfield and the Virginia Highlands Community College located in our town. And with the growth that we've seen in our town, Emory and Hendry College, which is a liberal arts school in Emory, Virginia, they have opened a School of Health Science in our town, the old, I don't know, hospital we have. And it's a graduate level class, and it's really made a difference. I kind of look at it as the shot in the arm that we needed, and what we needed was housing. And some CDBG money has been used to help provide some of this housing.
So thank you. I want to make sure that we get to some other folks. It sounds like you're doing some really great things in your city. Do you want to respond to the youth question?
Yes.
And then we'll have another question.
And with regards to the foster youth, I think it's important to realize that, you know, nothing is in and of itself. And if there's a problem with, I mean, if we have an issue with foster youth, then there's, you know, it has rippling effects. There are other issues, and that's why I think that the community block grant program as well as the home investment program are so critical, because in Orange County, for example, we use $100,000 to build a men's shelter. So that's helping men who have been homeless to transition back into regular life. Then they can get a job, they can support their families, because one thing that homelessness does is it splits up families. So if we can continue to get funds to do these type of things, to provide the wraparound services that people needed. We also put in there part of our Piedmont Health Clinic, which serves both men and women and children. So the more that we do that helps the family, then we can help foster children. Children won't have to go into foster care. Providing a home, if people can, for example, I mentioned the Community Home Trust, where they're helping families to get homes. I mean, $207,000 they got last year. Each home gets about homeowner, or would-be homeowner would get $15,000. So we're leveraging monies that they couldn't get on their own from the financial institution. But again, that provides stability for the family, which, you know, and the neighborhood. And so once we get all of these moving parts and working together, then we can, you know, wrestle some, actually resolve some of the issues with foster children, and they can stay in their homes with their families or relatives.
I just want to give a very quick example. So last March, the County of Los Angeles passed an initiative to raise sales tax to fund services for permanent supportive housing. And United Way was part of the campaign associated with that. It was a victory after waiting days to get the final count, and I participated in one of the victory lunches, and the population that was there that really helped that campaign and helped to make it a success were the transition age youth, and they were out in numbers really representing their community. So the question earlier today around how do we make sure that the people who are beneficiaries for whether it's CDBG or home funds are part of saving the resources, it's really our responsibility to go back to our community and work with whether it's transition age youth or the homeless or vets or people who live in our affordable housing to actually make calls to their representatives about how critical these resources are locally. And then we'll get to your questions.
I just wanted to address quickly about foster care and children in particular. Soft-spoken, but Carrie fixed it. We have a vicious cycle of poverty and homelessness in our country. The population that's most impacted by this is our children. They're the most vulnerable and they're the most needed. I get real emotional about this because we forget about the children. They're not a part of our equation when we do regulatory reform and all those things when we're trying to cut our budgets. But in our anti-poverty strategy, we try to put children at the forefront. When you cut services, you cut the quality of care. You cut the quantity of care. And also, they become homeless as a result of that. And forced homelessness. It's not a homelessness of choice. And they have no choice in this matter. As a result of that, you know, particularly in foster care, the services are not the best services in the world to start with, and to cut them even further devastates that issue. As a result, I think that there's a shared responsibility. I think this country is great because we're bound by the American creed that all people deserve the right to a better quality of life. And with that said, I want to share a quick little story about veterans, because you did mention veterans as well. We have a housing rehabilitation program, and we went out and inspected a house. And the house is where a disabled veteran lived. He boarded up his house when he left his house, and he boarded up his house when he came back, because it was in such deplorable condition. When we salute our men and women of the military, we have a right to take care of the men and women of the military as well. And so what we've done, we have a Veterans Build program in Shreveport because we honor our veterans. And we use VASH vouchers, and we use other things, and the Fuller Center for Housing, and other mechanisms to ensure that our veterans are taken care of.
All right, next question, please.
I'm Angela Oftenberg, and I'm the CEO of Vista Maria in Detroit, Michigan, and we work with foster youth, and we have been the recipient of block grants as well as home for transitional living programs, and we hope to continue with permanent supportive housing for young people who want to go to college and carry on with their career. So I appreciate all of you being here and sharing your tremendous outcomes. I'm here to say and ask a question because I was listening intently. I was amazed to learn about the high amount of flexibility as well as its use in terms of infrastructure beyond housing. So, and it is been made aware to me today how the outcomes are being driven. So, back to the question that was asked of us by Member Waters was, we need to fight aggressively, and an action's already been taken to eliminate, right? So we have to counter. And it seems to me that we typically take the approach of writing letters locally, right? But this seems to have, across the country, rural and urban, young and old, veterans and other servants, right? And professionals, that maybe we need to take an approach by segment and show our outcomes across the United States by segment, large and small, and then write and call, and write and call. It would be different. It would show that the outcomes are there and are driven in small communities and large and across all the segments, and why it matters that it needs to remain. I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were and comments, because you're a tremendous mandel and have lots of experience.
I would say that you are dead on there, and it's really important. The caveat that I would give you, and it's not really a caveat, it's probably an addendum, is that we have to tell everyday people why this matters to them. If you went into our city or any community represented on this panel and you asked the average citizen, what does your city do with the CDBG funds that it gets? They would say, what?
Right.
First, what is CDBG? I don't know where that goes. And so we have to explain, this is used for not just permanent supportive housing. I have to say it's used for Veterans Village, because everybody knows Veterans Village. It's used for the Sojourner Truth House. Everybody knows that. You know, it's used for whatever programs we have used it for, and you do the follow-up question. Now, do you want to see programs like that go away? Or better yet, do you want to see programs like that supported? If you do, then we need you to call, to write, to come, to let people know how you feel. And that has to be done in both rural and urban communities. And it can't just be, you know, we're gonna write a letter. Yeah. We're gonna let people know how we feel. But it has to be the person who probably has never wrote a letter or has never written a letter to their member of Congress ever. This is the time that we need them to write letters. And you're right, because it cuts across the board, we can get letters from every zip code, every place in the country.
I also think that, you know, you're absolutely right. We got to this. The problem that we faced this year, more than any other year, because this is not the first time this has been on the chopping block, is that everything's on the chopping block. And so you're going to get pulled in so many different, I don't even know what I'm you know, lobbying my congressperson and senator for anymore. Yeah. I mean, I got a little list here. So, you know, we talked about veteran supportive housing. It eliminates $40 million from that. We talked about housing choice neighborhoods, eliminated $130 million. Interagency Council on Homelessness, eliminates $3.6 million. Cuts out the emergency food and shelter program. Eliminates totally the EDA. Okay, you know, minority business agency phases it out. I mean, I don't even know where to begin to start lobbying, because all those programs are important to especially urban areas and a lot of rural areas. It cuts Amtrak's long distance trains. You know, I mean, it eliminates the Tiger program. I mean, everything that basically would impact poor neighborhoods, whether it's in urban or rural areas, it gets rid of. And so part of the problem I think we're going to be faced with this year is, what did we lobby for? Because, you know, everything's important. And all these programs are gonna have devastating impacts on our cities and our rural communities. And that's what I think is different this year than other years when we're talking about the elimination of home and CDBG, is that it's wrapped in with so many burn justice grants. They're gone. You know, I mean, everything that is important to us to really help support some of these poor communities is basically X'd out in this budget. And so that's gonna be the challenge I think we're gonna face here. How do we, foster care is important, housing's important, veterans are important, trains are important, roads are important, and all of it gets, you know, business development is important, and it all gets eliminated. And so that's the challenge that we have this year, not only putting a human face to it, but figuring out how we strategically kind of put all this together and say, this is what you're gonna be doing and the devastating impact it's gonna have if you take these programs out of the budget altogether and just eliminate them.
Right.
And I think it's gonna be challenging. I can't even wrap my head around it.
Sure.
I do want to add a thought to, first of all, second what people are saying about, I think, education, our own education about what these projects really are, when those funds are translated down into a project at the community level, what those are in our communities, and also lifting up the voices of the people whose lives are so directly affected. I think both of those things are important, and also I second this idea that figuring out how not to get distracted will be difficult. And I would add one thought, which is I think it's also incumbent upon us to make the business case to the best of our ability, because many of us may feel swayed by what we consider the moral case or an ethical case in the argument, but there is often a business case to be made as well, that there is, as I was describing in our example, and certainly in homelessness projects in general, there's very clear evidence that there's a lot of cost avoidance that jurisdictions can gain in the long run.
Yeah, I was recently in a conversation with someone, and the advice was, because we shouldn't have to make a choice as a community. It's like we shouldn't have to choose between housing people and education and making sure that our vets are served or kids coming out of foster care are served. What we really care about is making sure that domestic projects, the really safety net programs that are critical to the communities that we serve, whether it's urban communities or rural communities, are not cut. So I think the common voice around sustaining these safety net programs, I think, is really critically important. So there was.
Right, and I'd like to just echo what you were saying in terms of letting other people know and telling the story. A lot of people really are ignorant of what the various programs do. So I think it's incumbent upon us to encourage people to talk about how they have been affected by the funds. Some of the programs in Orange County, they get the money, when they have their annual meetings or festivities, they will have someone who has actually had a success story because of the CDBG funds or the home funds to tell their story. And I think, we have to make it personal, we have to make it human. And then, again, I would say, the business aspect of it as well, because I think, the business and the financial, because to put it with, to just say that the states and the local governments, the counties and the cities have to foot the bill is almost impossible. I mean, we're already grappling with our own local budgets. Our state is about to cut budgets again. So where does that leave us? It's another unfunded mandate to take care of our people. And as you were saying, we've already paid the taxes.
Well, and if you think about it, there's no way that we at the local level can pick up all these costs.
Just no way.
I mean, if they eliminate LIHEAP, if they eliminate programs for, in our schools and brownfields and super funds and winterization programs and adult education, career and technical education, I'm just reading a list. There's no way that we could pick it up. It's impossible. And so we're going to really, I think, set us back as a country decades.
But what I wanted to say on to that,
because we can't raise taxes locally enough to
we can't. But we also
pay for these initiatives.
But we also have to talk to our state legislators as well. So when we get we get community folks, city, county, and the state legislators to talk to folks right here in DC, so that they understand that this is not just one or two communities that are crying for help. This is a real issue that has to be handled at the federal level, because it's the only way it's gonna be successful.
You know, the other thing about the business case is when you talk about these programs, you've heard how everybody at this table has leveraged, used CDBG money to leverage private investment. And, you know, I have to think that the people who are investing privately have a closer relationship with the president than I do. I mean, let's just be realistic about this. And so, you know, in Gary, for $2 million in home funds, we had $20 million in private investment. That's 10-1. So let's, you know, tell that story, because it's hard to argue with that.
Right.
So I'm gonna see if there are any other questions from the audience. There's another question? And then check in with Teresa around what our next step should be after this question.
Thank you enough, guys. But this is not more of a question, but more of a suggestion, maybe perhaps. So one of the, and keeping it real completely, you know, when you talk about the use of this grant, you know, a lot of older, Black, LGBT community, you know, people, they're the ones that are really getting the brunt of this, in addition to our children. So, but I wouldn't have known this if I didn't see a campaign, if I didn't hear a story, if I didn't hear this on the radio, NPR, you know, I wouldn't have known what was going on. So has there been some sort of established campaign, perhaps, to bring awareness to this? Because education is prime, and if you let people know, and you tell them, and foster a campaign in your local, you know, state, perhaps that may bring some sort of awareness.
Well, we just
So
found out
you're
about
giving us a mandate.
Say that again?
So you're giving us a mandate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right, no, that's what we should be doing.
Is anyone here part of the HOME Coalition?
Yeah.
There are people in the audience, yeah. But there is, I don't know if someone from the HOME Coalition wants to speak to it.
I'll speak about the CDBG Coalition. We're actually, a lot of folks in the room are part of the CDBG Coalition. I'm Vicki Watson with the National Community Development Association, and some of the coalition members are here, the National Association of Counties, U.S. Conference of Mayors, Council of State Community Development Agencies. I saw NARO is here, and many others. And we actually we as a group started the coalition about 5 years ago as a means of educating congressional members about CDBG, because the program has started to be cut at that time. And we've been able to tread water over the last few years, but I've never seen an instance where both CDBG and HOME have been proposed for elimination at the same time. So it makes it a doubly difficult battle for us. But we do have a coalition, and there is a HOME coalition, which is led by the National Council of State Housing Agencies. And we do work with our groups and our members and their beneficiaries at the local state level to get the word out about CDBG, but it needs to be a more fervent grassroots campaign, I think, and not just the direct beneficiaries, but everybody in the community that supports these programs.
Thank you very much. We're still in the middle of a vote, but I wanted to make sure that I come back and thank all of our panelists who have come here to participate with us today, to thank all of you who have joined in, because you understand the importance of the struggle that we must be involved with. Let me ask you this. If you could organize a town hall meeting or a gathering of some kind in your city, in your jurisdiction, could you get the beneficiaries plus supporters to come out to something like this? Okay, you know who your beneficiaries are, and we need to talk directly to them. And I would like to ask you if you think it would be helpful for the elected official of the area, if you live in the right area where you have an elected official who's supporting you, to come to such a meeting. We would help you to talk with your elected official and get them there, if that would be helpful in, you know, helping to bring out the beneficiaries plus. Do you think that would be helpful?
Absolutely.
And I want you to know, for some of you who may live in areas where you don't have a supportive elected official, We have now been very successful at having members in the adjacent districts who may be of the opposite party come into that area. We've been doing it with health care issues, the ACA, Obamacare, etc., and it's been working. And so if you'd like to engage, either way, call us. Let us know. We will help you to get the representative out there. I wish we could go longer, but we can't. Thank you all so very much for being here. Thank you.